So welcome to this Select Technology and Right Way Compliance webinar, Securing the New Normal. My name's Jig Mehta, I'm the Marketing Executive for Select Technology. Your presenter today will be Nick Ellis, our Digital Transformation Consultant, and I'm going to hand you over to Nick now.
Welcome everybody that's listening and indeed watching. As Jig said, very hopeful that you're having a good day. Questions that occur to you during the course of this, please do put into the panel on the right hand side. I am keeping an eye on them. If it's something that I think is immediately relevant, I will pick up on it, but generally they're going to be answered in a sort of separate discussion at the end. You've seen the slides, which I'm not going to read out to you entirely, but the guests today, we have Neil Tyson, who's the Director of Right Way Compliance, recently featured in The Guardian as cited as an expert on the subject of fraud and in business, and how we can all do our bit to reduce that. And we also have Russell Gower-Leech, who's the Technical Solutions Architect here at Select Technology. This information that you can see here is also included in the meeting invite. So if you're interested to follow up more, do please have a look through that and let us know. Today we're talking about the ways that criminals are taking advantage of coronavirus, and they are, sadly, and the psychology of why we fall for it. We all think, oh well, I'm cleverer than that, I'm smarter than that, but actually if you look, there are a lot of stories of some very smart people who do fall for it. Excuse me. And also a discussion of what we can do in terms of technology to help prevent that, and also in terms of our own behaviours and what we can do to limit the risk and limit the impact. So I'd like to start with Neil, if that's okay with you, Neil. Tell me, what are the risks that you're seeing at the moment, and the issues that are kind of particularly relevant right now?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Nick. And yeah, it's great to have this opportunity, because to a certain degree, actually, the kind of the problems that both businesses and individuals are facing now are actually, to a certain extent, no different to the problems that have been out there for a while, but the criminals have just adapted them to take advantage of the current situation. So, you know, it's the same kind of email-based scams where they're trying to get you to click on links or to download something that's going to then enable them to get access to your systems, or they're trying to get hold of your data in some way that they can either then use further down the line for fraud, or simply sell to other criminals on the internet. So the basics that we see at the moment are the same that we've been told before. You know, be careful what you click on an email. Be careful what what websites you visit, and all the rest of it. So that is not new. What is new is the way that they are using those scams, the way that they are trying to get us to do those things, because we all know we shouldn't do those things, and therefore, how do they get us to do that? And the way that they will try to do that is, obviously, everybody at the moment is desperate for information, for one thing, so that might lead us to click on things that we think might be useful from that perspective. We're hopeful that that we might be able to gain access to products or services that are hard to come by, and therefore, if that opportunity comes up, so that they will take advantage of the fact that we want to find out more, and we want to do something that we may, in other normal circumstances, steer well clear of. So, to one extent, they're the same kind of things, but it's just that they're tapping into a different way into our brains to try and get us to do something that we shouldn't. And there's examples out there. You say well, people won't get caught. There's a whole hospital in Europe that had their IT infrastructure hacked because somebody clicked on an email link that they shouldn't have, and it brought the hospital almost to a standstill, not able to do any operations. So at one level, this can be, we're not just talking about them getting access to your email address and password. This can actually bring organizations to a halt if we get it wrong.
That's really interesting. How exactly are you seeing the changes to the way these things are operating? So you're saying they're taking advantage of people's desire for information. How are there any differences that are specific to the moment that you're seeing?
Yeah, sure. So for example, if we give some specific examples, criminals purporting to be from a research group, either they've impersonated the Centre for Disease Control or the World Health Organization, where they've sent out questionnaires, or in some cases, particularly in the early days, where they were saying, well, actually, we need your details in order that we can then contact you in an emergency. And therefore, if you register with us, then we'll be able to contact you and members of your family if we need to trace you in an emergency situation. So there's a very different dynamic there in terms of actually what's going on in our own minds to say, well, actually, blimey, I'd better register for this because it looks legitimate, because it's the World Health Organization asking for this information, and therefore, why wouldn't I want to do that? And I may be endangering myself and my family if I don't do that. These are the kind of things that the criminals will do. We've seen where they've provided, useful articles and information or news about coronavirus, and everybody's desperate for news, or particularly in the early stages of the crisis, and therefore. Again, sign up for our newsletter, sign up for our information. Again, another way that they can get some of your information and credentials. So, as I say, none of this is groundbreaking stuff from a scam point of view, but they're using these coronavirus books to get us to do these things very specifically. So it might be, testing kits, face masks, and things that are in short supply. There was various medical equipment, and even to the extent where people were thinking, well, actually, vitamin C tablets might help stave off coronavirus, and therefore there's a sudden surge in people wanting to get vitamin C tablets. But it could be, well, we can't get hold of paracetamol, and suddenly there's a load of fake websites spring up offering these things, and these are all through middlemen sites like Shopify or whatever, where they can set up a shop front that looks legitimate in amongst all the other shop fronts there, and suddenly they're able to provide goods, services, products that nobody else has been able to source and supply. So but in desperate situations, people do desperate things.
Yeah, so I think maybe one way of putting it is that the change has been that they've moved from appealing to greed to appealing to fear. Historically, it was always, well, we can make you unreasonable amounts of money, or what have you.
Don't get me wrong, there are still some of those things out there as well. There are investment scams out there, saying now is a perfect time to take advantage of the low stock prices and you can make your fortune by investing in this marvelous scheme. So, as I say, there's nothing new there, but just the way that they're presenting that information and trying to hook us is where the change is.
So, Russ, I'm going to draw you in now because you've been sat there nodding away while Neil's been talking.
Uncharacteristically quiet.
Yeah. So the points that you were particularly nodding were around the fear versus greed, and also some of the earlier points around kind of being led into false information. Do you want to build on that a bit?
Yeah, so as Neil said, this sort of these types of scams, the technology behind it isn't anything new at all. But they're very good at tapping into the kind of the pop culture, the social consciousness. So as you say, where people were appealing to greed, I could give you 10% of £1 million if you launder this money for me. What they're actually trying to do is cater to either your fear or your thirst for knowledge. So a couple of things that have been going around, you've probably seen in the news, there was a corona spread app. This is back when the virus first started spreading. People were trying to get information about where it was spreading to, what regions were affected. People had holidays booked, they got family abroad, that sort of thing. So they were finding this app and downloading it to get an idea of where were the kind of hotspots. And what was interesting, again, I think yourself or Neil touched on it, the information in the app was accurate. It's actually being streamed via API from a legitimate research website, but the app itself was malicious. And it was going onto your machine and looking for credentials, looking for any other bits and pieces you can use to siphon off your information, to take control of the machine and then get further kind of valuable assets from them. So whether it be payment details capturing later on, or again, going back to that whole idea of registering for information. We're concerned about the health impacts to our friends and our family. This website's got loads of good information. I'll put in my details. I want them to get in touch with me. And what people kind of fail to realise is that your details are valuable. If you can gather enough information about somebody, you can either do identity theft. You can impersonate them to get credit to apply for things, or you can use it as a means of, or more sophisticatedly, phishing them, getting more information, getting more access from them, and things like that. So those, although the technologies behind it and the techniques aren't any different than what we've seen previously, it's the way that they're tapping into the social consciousness to do that. And it's very interesting the way that their criminal mindset works. They're great marketeers in some respects.
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Neil.
No, just going to pick up on a couple of those things. If these guys were working in your business and getting the same kind of click rates that and we were getting the same kind of click rates that they seem to get, we'd be doing really well as businesses. And but coming back to that point in terms of thirst for information, I think one of those malicious apps, it actually linked to what looked like the World Health Organization world map. And so people thought they were clicking on that map, but they weren't. They were clicking on a map that had been looked to create it. I don't know if you remember, I think right at the very beginning of the lockdown here in the UK, there was a government message that came out via text message across the network. So everybody got this one and only, as far as I'm aware, text message. And within a matter of hours, the criminals had managed to replicate the look of that and spoof that to make it look as if it was coming from as part of that text stream, and they added new text into it, so that those additional text, as far as the recipient was concerned, looked as if they were coming from that very same text stream. But those were then had links through to information which people would think, well, actually, blimey, this is a government text. It's actually information from the government, but it wasn't. It was taking them through to other web screens. And again, the level of sophistication on some of these things is unbelievable. Just in terms of, we know that sophistication is increasing, but the speed at which they're able to bring these things to life as well, and new developments is quite staggering. So they're very, very quick to adapt to new things that are coming out, knowing that we will be slow to react to those new things. So that, you know, absolutely, the technology, as Russell says, is not is not new. The way that they're trying to tap into us and get it to us. I mean, my bugbear, again, social media, Facebook, I see people who tell me that they will not be taken in by these scams. And yet they're, you know, they're sharing, then share in the very same breath, sharing information on social media that criminals can utilize for these phishing attacks, for these social engineering attacks, because it gives them information about you that if they then play that back to you in a conversation on the telephone or in an email or in a text, you think, oh, blimey, I must know this person because they know this about me, or that, and so they can build that trust very quickly by people oversharing the information that they're that they're presenting to the outside world. So, you know, people kind of think, oh, well, I haven't given my bank details away, so what's the problem? I've not entered my credit card detail. Where's the problem? Well, actually, just your email address, your name, you know, your favorite pet, your dog's name,
birthdays, that sort of stuff.
You know, where you like to go on holiday, your favorite TV program, because these are things that people actually use for their passwords as well, of course, and therefore actually gives them a good few goes at trying to guess people's passwords as well. So, but it's all part of that. As Russell says, it's not necessarily something that's instantly going to get you, but it's information that they will then be able to use further down the line, either for their own purposes in terms of some kind of scam, or to simply just sell that, because all of this has a price on the internet for the criminals. So, you know, you're you know, even down to and you know, your Tesco's club card, and obviously other supermarkets are available, but you know, but that information, even on you know, that's contained in there, that is valuable to the criminals for these social engineering tricks.
It's interesting. I spend probably more time on Twitter than is healthy for any psychologically sound person, but you see commonly on there things like I'm seeing at Christmas the your Christmas elf name. You see these a lot. They're like, your Christmas elf name is the school you went to and your mother's maiden name. You go, I think I'm probably not going to respond to that one actually. But a lot of people do, because they think, oh, this is fun. This is you know,
And that's it. It's disguised as innocence, isn't it? It's that whole. It's not someone asking you sensitive information. That just it's a bit of a laugh. It's fun.
Yeah, that's right. And I think I was going to pick up on something you said earlier, actually, Russ, about genuine apps with a malicious, or rather malicious apps with a genuine layer is probably the right way around, actually. And the ping in my head about permissions and people checking the permissions when they're installing apps. Maybe you want to build on that a bit?
Yeah, this is kind of a common sort of thing where we all want kind of convenience, and I almost want to name drop Zoom a little bit in this, because there is a tangent link there, where the more easy we make applications to consume, to install, to whatever, the more we tend to use them. If something's a pain in the arse to install, we're not going to install it. And permissions is an interesting fact. So Zoom have recently been in trouble with, I think it's their Mac specific version of their meeting app, where the installer uses deprecated API calls. So Apple have deprecated them because they pose a security risk. They allow the app to install with far more permissions than it actually needs. So if the app is then compromised, the attacker has far more access to your device than is required. And there's similar stories with other kind of online meeting tools where they want to try and tap into your webcam, even if it's browser based. Some of them, if the code is a little bit too, I'm trying to be generous, poorly written, or poorly kind of tested, it will actually request more permissions of the device, and it's actually required just to tap into your camera to do things. So yeah, you're kind of you're inviting this stuff in because it's convenient, because it's easy. When how many of us read the user license agreement, all the bits and pieces? We don't want that hassle.
Yeah, I know, and I think it's okay for you to mention Zoom because, to their credit, one of the reasons this is as well known as it is because Zoom's CEO published an open letter in which he said, "Yeah, we massively got that wrong, and we're very sorry, and we won't do it again." There are others, social networks that have apps that do amazing amounts of things. Let's say the market-leading social network.
They're consistently bad.
And if nothing else, if you want to double the length of your battery life on your device, uninstalling that app is a good start because it's constantly running all the time, gathering data, sending it back, and it's not entirely clear why. But I don't think it's malicious in the sense we're talking about here, so we'll move on from that. Why do intelligent people fall for it? We've talked a bit about the fear. Why do we think why are people not sufficiently on their guard? I think that's what I'm asking here.
I think because people are asking for the information. It's not a case that someone's deliberately kind of got, well, in some cases people have gone to them, they've sent out the usual emails and bits and pieces, but in a lot of cases we're actively seeking that information. So because we've asked for it, we're less on our guard about it. And I think it's probably an interesting point to make that phishing, although at its really basic level, where you've got the Nigerian prince trying to get you to help him get out of the country with the diamonds and things, is all really unbelievable. We've all seen it a million times and no one really falls for it. But what you've got to appreciate is that there are going to be a demographic of people who are a little bit more naive and may fall for it, but also phishing can have varying levels of sophistication. As Neil said, if people can get enough information about you from social media, is a great example. They can craft quite convincing conversations that make you believe, yeah, I've had a conversation with that person, or this person's a likable person. They've got similar interests to me. I can relate to them, and we're all going to get fooled with enough time and effort and energy. All of us would get fooled. I think the important thing is to accept that fact and to realise that the harder we make it for them, that initial cost of entry, the less likely they are to put that effort in. If that makes sense.
Yeah, Neil, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think if you look specifically at what's happening now, but this isn't limited to just this coronavirus. If you look at any kind of the natural disasters that have happened, particularly over the recent history, so hurricanes in the US, or whatever it happens to be, there is a spike in criminal activity because they know that actually we're vulnerable at that point in time. We're all operating in an unusual environment at the moment, a very unusual environment, and that's uncomfortable. And therefore, if the fraudsters can do something that makes us feel more comfortable and safe in our surroundings, ironically, then the easier it is for them to land with some of these messages, to tap into what's going on in our brains that we don't necessarily even have any comprehension that's happening, because it's very subtle. But at this point in time, I would say every one of us is in a far more vulnerable state and far more likely to do something that in any other situation we just wouldn't entertain, because just because of the state that we are in. This is really unusual times. People are, and as time goes on, these things will change. So these are things that are there at the moment, in terms of people, the shortages that are out there, the things that are applicable at a point in time. Now that's going to change as we move through into different cycles of the crisis. So we need to be also looking at, further out to say, well, what's likely to be the next step in the way that this crisis develops, because that's where the criminals are going to be looking next to say, we need to now take advantage of that next step. So there may not then be a clamour for face masks or whatever, but there's probably going to be something else that is filling that gap, filling that need, and that's what they're going to then be tapping into. So we just need to be smart about how we're looking at that. But for me, fundamentally, we are all in a vulnerable state right now. The criminals know that. We're operating in unfamiliar environments, actually in a lot of cases operating unfamiliar technology,
Indeed.
And therefore, if something pops up on your screen, you've just downloaded a new app or a new bit of software, and something suddenly pops up that says, well, actually, yeah, you now need to download this, or you need to log in to this pop-up screen that suddenly appeared on your computer. You don't know that that's not that's not normal. So off you go and you type in. So it's that unfamiliarity with where we are now and a vulnerable state, I would say.
Yeah, I think for the benefit of the audience, the slightly knowing reference there is the fact that it took us 3 attempts to work out how to host this very webinar. So another thing actually that there was almost a demonstration of your point there, Neil, whilst you were talking, in as much as we are suddenly tolerant of things that maybe even a month ago we would have found unacceptable or irritating. One of which I've been presenting quite a few webinars, and people are surprisingly tolerant of the fact that my dog occasionally likes to make a contribution to the content, which normally people would go, that's weird, but we're all accepting a new normal, right? We're all doing something that previously we would have thought odd. And while you were talking there, Neil, I could hear Russell's kids having a good charge around the house. And again, normally
or in the garden.
Think that other in the garden, but normally we would think, well, that's that's off-putting, but we're all just accepting these scenarios now because we know things are different. And I guess you're right, that leads us also into accepting things like, oh, I need to press this button, I need to install. It's all kind of part of the same mindset, isn't it? We accept dogs in business meetings, we accept children in business meetings, we accept pop-ups that say you have to install this to proceed. So let's move on a little bit. So Russ, I want to pick your brains as our systems architect and chief paranoid defender of boundaries.
Tinfoil hat wearer. I like
tinfoil hat wearer. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the technology solutions that exist, or solutions is perhaps too strong, but the tools that we can use to defend individually and as businesses.
Okay, so what's interesting is the tools aren't too much different to what we would normally use. I think, as both yourself and Neil touched upon, the challenge is going to be the unfamiliarity. We're all working in a slightly different environment. We are all having to use new tools in some respects. For us here at Select, all the tools we're using at the moment, we've been using for a couple of years. I regularly work from home quite a lot. I did in my previous job, different set of tools, but the same flexibility. And a lot of companies aren't going to be as fortunate as that. They are going to have had that kind of situation where they had to go to the office or the building because everything was in the noisy cupboard down the corner with all the aircon. So trying to extend the same security tools and things, or even just extend the same tools to people's homes is a challenge. So a lot of the best kind of defenses are going to be the simple stuff, the user awareness. So yeah, kind of going back to the couple of things we talked about earlier. If you want information about the current crisis, or any crisis for that matter, again, Neil touched on this, when there are other disasters around the world, these guys will capitalise on that kind of social crest. They'll ride that wave in and catch up on the people's interest. Whenever that's going on, go to an actual news site. Don't click on every email that's got breaking news. Don't click on the private message you might get in Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever, where check out this news article. Google up the BBC, Google up CNN or whoever you got to get your news from. If you're a Daily Mail reader, people like that, go to those sites directly and look up the content that's on there. It's far less likely to be malicious. If someone's offering you this content You've got to kind of ask yourself why they're offering it. The same kind of thing with applications. If you want information, you shouldn't need to install something to get information more often than not. Again, we kind of live in this world where everything is on our phones or on our laptops and tablets. How often do we actually install something to get to something? Everything's web-based these days. So there's less and less need to install something. If you do have to install something, ask yourself, do I really need to? Do I want it? Can I get the same information from elsewhere? So those kind of common sense approaches will kind of pay dividends. And I want to touch on kind of two other things specifically around this. One is I like the idea of social media distancing. We're practicing social distancing. I think we should do a similar thing with social media distancing, because again, what you'll find is that we're giving away a lot of information on social media sites, whether we mean to or not. And depending on our privacy settings, we may be giving that out to a wider audience than we intended to. So it's worth checking that. But one thing I get quite frequently, and if anyone actually is listening and has done this, this is why. I get a lot of requests from people on LinkedIn for connection requests, mostly from recruitment companies and other people. I never click accept because I've never met them. If I'm being approached by somebody that I've never met in person or hasn't got a decent profile photo or no photo at all, I will never accept it, because it could be anybody and it could be something that they'd later use to try and kind of get in touch. So a bit of social media distancing will help stop some of the engineering, stop some of the spread of social phishing. And the other thing is, where we are now having to use these new tools, actually play around with them before we need to get into Teams and Zoom and all those other video conferencing. Everyone's suddenly got on board with video conferencing because they've had to. We're missing that face-to-face interaction with people. Play around with it amongst one or two people in the office before you start inviting customers and other people into a meeting. Look at security settings. Can I put a pin on the meeting? Can I make sure the meeting is private so random guests can't join in and kind of bomb the session and things like that? Because even if the meeting is fairly innocuous, if people do kind of get hold of a publicly accessible link and start listening in, what information are you giving away? There are confidentiality considerations to have, even if you may not be in the forefront of your mind.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one thing, actually, considering the intent of the provider, your suggestion that forwarded message on WhatsApp that doesn't tell you where it was forwarded from might not be entirely trustworthy is obviously quite well taken. That there's a lot of that going on, I'm seeing, and I've had a few very challenging conversations with people where they forwarded things to me and I've said, well, let's have a little think about where that came from and the reliability of it. And
that's another big topic, actually, isn't it? Sorry,
Sorry, say that again, Ross.
That's another big topic, actually. The whole kind of again, a lot of these threats would come from phishing, traditional email phishing or social media phishing, and what people tend to do is forward it on to report it. Oh, watch out for this, or I'm going to send this on to our IT team. I've got this dodgy-looking email, and what they're actually doing is propagating that threat, because if there's content in there that can be executed as soon as the mail client opens it, that infection is now spread onto another person. What you need to make sure that you, as a business owner, your team or your staff are familiar with the tools you use to protect the business and the processes to use to report issues. So in the specifics of spam handling, if you're getting a malicious email, don't forward it on. Just delete it if you're not expecting it. Don't open any attachments, don't click on any links. If you do need to report it to somebody, there will generally be a reporting process. There's going to be plugins in the email client to report it back to the IT team safely, or pick up the phone and speak to the IT team. How would you like me to provide this to you to make sure that you're able to prevent other people from potentially receiving it and infecting the network or their device? So again, it's quite basic stuff, but just making people aware of what to do and how to respond to things. And at the end of the day, where we are working in these very new situations, I don't think anyone's going to be too upset if you're asking a few more questions or kind of on the phone a bit more, just double checking things. There's no harm in doing that.
Yeah, and it doesn't sound to me we're not talking about we're not suggesting to businesses they need to go and spend some vast amount of capital on securing things. It's more awareness and sensible behaviours that we're talking about here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the interesting things. I mean, there are absolutely tools you can go and buy to bolster your security. The whole point of IT and technology is to enable. It's meant to make what you do that bit easier, or to take away problems you don't want to have to kind of deal with. So you can definitely go out and buy stuff. And if you want to look at buying products and services to help make your workforce more secure and more productive, look at cloud-based stuff, because it's going to be easier to deploy and it'll be ready straight away, because obviously there are supply chain issues with the current lockdown. But you don't necessarily need to go and do that. I mean, a lot of companies will actually have tools and options in their current kind of infrastructure that just need turning on, need configuring, need setting up, or a few policies to help people work with them in the right way. You don't need to necessarily go and buy something to address these kind of challenges. You can do quite a lot just with what you've got more often than not.
Thanks very much. Go on, Neil.
Yeah, just to echo on a couple of those points. I mean, the leakage of information is a key one here, not just from your own personal information, but from the business perspective as well. And coming back on Russell's point there, in terms of actually, I've been on calls, and you may have been as well, where somebody is sat in their makeshift office or whatever, and on a bookshelf behind them, I've seen folders with clients' names on, or projects that they're working on, and you're actually not listening to what that person is saying. You're just trying to make out what they've got on their that's of interest on their bookcase. So we need to be aware of the environment that we are now operating in, and we need to recognise that environment has changed for people, and that change and that transition from what may have well been documented, well-rehearsed procedures in a BAU state, where the majority of the time we're in the actual office, the physical office, talking to each other and interacting with each other in lots of ways as the day goes on, to that remote working world that we're now in. That is a fundamental shift, and people are now not necessarily even using their work laptops that might have different layers of security built into it, or where all the security updates have been done. They may be logging in from their personal devices. Well, have they got the same layers of security on them that you would expect? Are they up to date? Back to basic stuff. But whereas in that office environment, there might be somebody that was taking care of all that for us in terms of the bits of kit that we're using in the office. We're now in a home environment where we may be using our own personal stuff. It's down to us to sort that out now, quite often. But from an IT management perspective, well, how do you know that people are doing that? How do you know that people are protecting that? How are you going to convince your customers that you're keeping their data safe if you're on a web call with them and you've got a load of confidential information on display behind you? These are all things that we just need to have a slightly different mindset, just in terms of the way that we're viewing the world right now. And so I love the idea of being more antisocial on social media, by the way. I think that's absolutely the right thing as well. But I think
I was like that before, in all fairness.
Yes, this is not new. Yeah.
But just like there's nothing new in terms of the fundamental things that we need to be guarding against, actually there's nothing new in the fundamental things that we need to get right in terms of how we're managing our security against these things. Our password policies and our whether we've got extra layers of security with the things that we're tapping into through two-factor authentication, things like that, and just keeping software and browsers and operating systems up to date. these are the basics of IT security, the fundamentals that we just need to make sure that everybody is adhering to right now. So there's an education element, but there's some basic IT stuff that maybe we're not used to having to do too much of ourselves because we're used to the IT guy doing it. Or businesses didn't really need to worry too much about it because they knew, well, we've just got this bit of kit in the office and we know how that works, without thinking, well, yeah, but everybody's now tapping in to this world from, God knows where and on what kind of a device. How do you manage that? And some of that they will be able to do for themselves, but some of them, some of it will need technical help as well. But unless people know that they might need that help, unless you prompt the thought, well, actually, I'm not sure how I secure this communication with this client, or I'm not sure whether I'm sharing too much information, then that's where the education bit comes in. Is just raising that awareness that actually this might be a problem, and to think about it. Just take 5 minutes to have a think about it and say, is there a risk here with what I'm about to do? Whether that's pressing a button, sending an email, clicking on a website, whatever it happens to be. Just take that 5-minute step back to say, do you know what? Does this make sense to me? Am I rushing into this? Because that's the other thing, is the fraudsters love to rush you into doing something. If they can create a degree of urgency in what you're doing, click this in the next 5 minutes, or otherwise, something bad is going to happen. Then they will try and instill that sense of urgency in there. So just keep your wits about you, but it's about being aware of that new environment that people are operating in, because that's the difference.
Can I just move on as we come towards the end of the hour? We've all got these difficult things that we're having to balance now, and we're starting to consider how to deal with kind of prevention. What do we need to think about as businesses and as individuals about what to do when we fail to prevent? Because ultimately it happens to all of us in the end, one way or another. So if an incident does arise, if somebody does break through, you mentioned the hospital in Germany earlier, Neil, what should we be putting in place now to help us respond to that if it does happen?
I think for me, in terms of, there's two kind of scenarios here. Either you've got an existing plan, a response plan in terms of an IT event, in which case you just need to be reviewing that for the current situation, because I bet that was written prior to the crisis, and from a BAU perspective almost. If this happens when we're all in the office, then this is how we respond. Well, actually, how are you going to respond if everybody's in different places? If the one person that you're relying on to initiate that plan isn't around, isn't available. What happens if that kicks off at 3 o'clock in the morning rather than at 10 o'clock in the morning? It's just looking at what your existing plan is and saying, does that work in this new virtual world? Even to the extent, the classic one, I think there was a well-crafted plan, and everybody had, thought this is absolutely fantastic. We've got this nailed. And then step one was that they needed to log into something, and in order to access critical data that they needed to manage at the point, and nobody knew what the password was to get into to this vital piece of information. The one person that did know but guard against that. Don't do what I think it was it NASA or somebody in the US did in terms of securing all their nuclear sites. I think it wouldn't be NASA, but whoever is responsible for the nuclear sites in America, it had a password so that everybody could remember it. Which was maybe 8 zeros or something like that. Don't go to that extent to make it easy to put your plans in place, but you need to be thinking about how people are going to be able to manage that incident remotely. How are they going to recognize that something is happening? How long is it going to take them to recognize that something is happening? And how long is it going to take them to get hold of the right person that can help them solve that when they're working remotely? And then how long is it going to take that person to react when they're working remotely, because they may be able to access different systems in different ways that they've not rehearsed for, because this is the first time that they've actually had to initiate it. So this is about making sure that any plans that you've got have been adapted for the new world, but equally, if you haven't got a plan, now's the time to write one. And actually, at least then your blank sheet of paper you're starting from and that you're putting pieces on is going to be relevant to the new world, because that's the world that you're writing it in. But for me, it's just understanding how you're going to know that something's going wrong. How quickly are you going to be able to react when it does? And particularly if that is relating to key financial data or key customer data that is in danger of walking out of the door until you stop it. Because these are the kind of things that will just as much as businesses are rightly worried about their financials and where's their income coming from now, and all of the rest of it, because that could literally kill the organization. Actually, some of these things that we're talking about here at one level could also have an equally drastic effect. So you need to be devoting as much time and energy to thinking about these things as you are to how are you just maintaining your BAU operations. And I think the danger at the moment is that the focus is on how are we just going to continue to operate, rather than how are we continuing to operate safely and securely. And it's adding that extra dimension on to that thought process.
Thank you for that. Building on all of that, Russ, is there anything that can be done to automate or to mitigate using the technology that's available to us now?
Yeah, so mitigation kind of comes down to the core principles of having strong password policies, MFA, so two-factor authentication. Again, none of this is kind of new stuff. It's all quite basic, but what the really interesting bit is it's got a holistic approach to things security. So you've got the preventative stuff, which would be in place beforehand, and you've also got the reactive stuff. So as Neil was talking about, you need to have a process and a plan to follow when you do find that you are compromised or you've got sensitive data leaving the business. The ways in which you can kind of pick that stuff up, again, a lot of the cases, it's actually built into some of the platforms and tools that you're already using. So if you have things like MFA available to you, make sure you turn it on. And if you've got the option, have the app on your smartphone. What that tends to do is when someone tries to log in as you, the app will ping on your device. If this is pinging in the middle of the night and you're not nowhere near a laptop or a PC, that's a pretty clear indication that someone's trying to use your account, and you can report that. If you've got kind of standard working hours, if your staff only work between 9 and 5:30, turn off their access after 5:30, after 6 o'clock, whatever it is. Pick a time that's acceptable to the business, and turn off their ability to log in. If you suddenly see loads of login attempts in the middle of the night, it's pretty likely it's not a genuine member of staff. And again, you can report and you can alert against that kind of stuff. And similarly, if you've got a lot of the kind of cloud storage and cloud email platforms and firewalls for that matter, will actually have data loss prevention policies. They're a little bit trickier to kind of set up, that you have to go through a period of testing and adjusting, but what they're designed to do is identify information that's potentially sensitive on its way out of the network in some way. So if you're trying to email around documents full of credit card numbers or sort codes, or any document that your company has considered confidential and tagged it appropriately, if that's heading out of our email or someone's trying to take it out of kind of OneDrive in Dropbox or vice versa, you should be able to flag that kind of stuff. And again, a lot of this stuff is actually kind of baked in. It just needs turning on because it can be quite noisy. Getting a lot of false positives and alerts initially, where you need to fine tune what is kind of normal operation, what data does move around and where does it move to, and then look at actually this is outside the norm. This is the stuff we want to worry about.
Thank you for that. I think we're kind of coming towards the end of our allotted time. We're obviously being incredibly thorough because we've covered quite a lot of ground here. The main things to summarise that we've taken out of this is the basic behaviours have not changed. That the attack targets are slightly more focused on the particular events right now, but we're not seeing some incredibly sophisticated new techniques coming out of coronavirus. It's more that they're just playing on fears rather than on greed. And I think also the need to plan and the need to be conscious of it all is as strong and more strong now, even than has always been the case. And then as we're planning for if the situation does arise, it's about to draw on Neil's points. It's about are we using up-to-date plans? Have we reviewed the plans? Do the plans have any key dependencies on them that we need to overlook? I mean, I'd be slightly alarmed. In fact, I am slightly alarmed to discover that the American nuclear arsenal is accessible with a single password. But most businesses are probably less critical than the American nuclear arsenal. But nonetheless, the issue still stands. Are your passwords secure? Do you know how to access them? Have you got proper password governance and so on? All of that's important. And are the right people going to be accessible? And Russ's point at the end about how actually looking at what normal looks like and alerting against deviations from normal. Multiple attempts for an account to log on at 3 o'clock in the morning. Although I would say at the moment there are some strange legitimate behaviours going on of people with insomnia getting up and working in the middle of the night and what have you. So that's something to consider as well. Chaps, thank you very much for your time. Very much appreciated. Is there anything that either of you would like to add in now that we haven't covered that you think we need to add in?
I think one thing that's worth mentioning as part of that whole kind of response plan is probably to assume the worst. Assume that you have been compromised, data has left the business, and that they've kind of powered everything down on their way out the door to try and slow you down and slow down the detection of that. Ransomware is obviously a quite a common one. So if you have been impacted by those types of issues, or you think your network is still infected, make sure you've actually got a good availability solution in place. Make sure that your backups are frequent and that they can recover those key systems quickly and test it more crucially. There is an awful lot of businesses out there that have the kind of the once a day backup, and there's no kind of forethought as to actually how do we recover that data? How quickly can we get it back if we need to? And what's required to do that. So if you get an infection, you can't always clean it out, and you can't be sure it's actually gone. So you're actually better off just rolling back to an older state and kind of getting business back to normal from there.
Yep. Neil?
Yeah, I think in terms of, we've said there's, a lot of the time there's nothing new here. There's nothing remarkable here other than the way that they're targeting people. Don't be complacent because of that. So don't assume that just because of that, that actually you don't need to do anything because you think you've got it nailed. Because, as I say, it's a different environment that we're operating in. And, you know, to bring it back to kind of a standard risk management piece, you know, it may be that you've thought about these risks before. Your response now may be different because actually what we're looking at is that the likelihood of something happening has just increased massively. So if you're looking at it from a risk management perspective, it throws out your previous risk assessment, even just from a likelihood of it happening perspective. So don't be complacent just because you think, well, actually, there's nothing new here.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I'm going to round up with my one tip. This is not my area of expertise, and I'm very grateful to have you guys here to talk about this. My one tip is emailed invoices if it's a new vendor, and I have engaged with a new vendor this week. I recommend to the people of Kent there's a very good mobile bar that is having to sell its stock by delivery. So I bought a bottle of gin yesterday, got sent an invoice. First thing I did was took a little screenshot of the bank details on that invoice and sent it back to what I know is a trusted contact in that company and said, just to confirm, this is your bank, is it, not some other bank? Because that's the thing that happens as well. Invoices that appear legit and are in fact faked because they're spotting that, they're seeing the transaction. You know, the discussion started on LinkedIn, so it was visible to everyone. Always worth checking if it's a new supplier that you've not worked with before, and we're all picking up a lot of those at the moment. Just check the bank details, make sure you're sending the money to the right place, because eventually they will want their money. So that's my one small contribution to the world of security. Thank you very much, guys. Really interesting conversation, really enlightening for me. I've learned stuff, hopefully others have as well, and thanks for your time.